buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Well, good morning, my friends. How are you? Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Michael Dukes Show, broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator, and live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukesshow.com. Hi, how are you? Okay, we have got a lot of things to cover here this morning. We've got the the two-part show. In hour two today, we're going to be talking with State Senator Robb Myers, who's coming on board to talk with us about SJR 14, which has to do with the permanent fund and the combining of the funds. And he's going to walk us through some details on what's going on with that. Like what's the purpose? What's the danger? What's the solution? And everything else. We'll probably also be able to have a chance to talk to him about some of the other issues, including the veto override, the oil pricing issue, which we're going to be facing coming into the first part of the year, and and more. So that's all coming up in hour two today. In hour one, we're going to be going over a couple different things. One, the meeting that took place on Monday, which I had wanted to attend, but I wasn't able to make it up there. It took place in the Kenai. It was a public meeting with Mayor Peter Machicki and the Attorney General Treg Taylor and one of his assistants, talking about the new grand jury, I guess I would say selection process. It's not really right. It's not selecting grand jurors, but it's the investigatory process that has been outlined now by the State Department of Law. It's a new formalized process for residents to be able to request an investigation by the grand jury. And on Monday, Treg Taylor gave a step-by-step explanation. Jacob Dye over at the Peninsula Clarion has written about this. And like I said, I wanted to be at the meeting, but I was unable to attend. But we're going to give you some recap on that. And we're hoping that this issue is not finished. You probably heard our show with David Haig here not too long ago. I know we talked pretty exhaustively about this with Ben Carpenter. We did a 2-hour show with Ben Carpenter here a few weeks back, talking about the changes that are coming in the grand jury, and we're going to go over all that as well. In addition, we're also going to talk about the teachers union in Anchorage is now saying they need more. It's not competitive enough for them. They're just not competitive enough. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk a little bit more, even though we kind of went through this yesterday. The more I think about it, I guess I could say that the more agitated I get about this whole idea of how somehow an education funding task force is going to give us answers and allow us to fix the educational situation here in the state of Alaska. Even the name, the funding task force. This is okay. I'm going to get into that in a second because, again, there are just certain things when the more that I think about it and the more that I kind of ruminate on what's happening with that, the more that I can spin out of it. This is, I'm kind of the what if game, playing the what if game with it. And we're going to talk about that here in hour one this morning. I hope you guys are all ready and are excited about today. Turned out to be a beautiful day yesterday. I actually spent part of the day up in the Soldotna Kenai area, and wow, it just turned into a. Good thing I dressed in layers because I was a little cold in the morning, and by the time I got up there, I was like, "Ooh, man!" Just a beautiful, beautiful summer continuing down here on the Lower Peninsula. I hope wherever you are in the state that you are getting that last little dribs and drabs of summer in before it gets too cold. Somebody said last week it was 31 degrees in Fairbanks one of the mornings, and I was just like, wow, okay. So glad that, I love the people in Fairbanks, love everything else. I'm so glad I'm not up there to have to deal with the weather anymore. That is definitely a plus for me as far as it goes. All right, but we're ready to crack on here and get things ready to rock and roll. I'm trying to decide which story I want to start with. I guess we'll dive into the. I guess we'll dive into this meeting that took place on Monday in Kenai. So the State Attorney General, Treg Taylor, who we've all heard the name, we've all heard what's going on. There's been a lot of accusations that have flown back and forth. I know we had the whole thing with Doug Ignell here. He's been writing about this, and his assertion is that somehow the Attorney General is involved in some of the the processes, or kind of hiding the hiding and abusing the system and everything else. But I haven't really been able to get a good handle on this because I haven't had anybody else kind of on the other side. And I always like to try and get some kind of balance in what we're talking about. This may have been as close as we're going to get in the short term on how things are working. Of course, we had David Haig, as I mentioned, and Ben Carpenter both on talking about some of the changes that are going on in the grand jury system. And I guess I should start off by saying, to begin with, that the grand jury process is pretty much already outlined in the state constitution, and that the grand jury is the stopgap for the citizens. It is the final check on government for the citizens, that if there is some kind of problem, or is there some kind of allegations of corruption or malfeasance, this is the final process that people have to go through to try and investigate that same said government, right? I mean, there's two functions of the jury. One is indictment, one is presentment, and presentment includes the investigatory portion of we're going to present the facts and we're going to make a decision, and looking at government is one of the major functions of the grand jury. And it's not a clear or clean system. The Constitution lines it out, but it doesn't do so in specificity. It doesn't say specifically, you talk to the foreman of the jury, or you do this, or you do that. And so it seems like that the argument from the courts, the Alaska Supreme Court, is to they want to clarify this, they want to codify, they want to put, but that's that's not, I don't think that's not what the framers intended. And the fact that you have the judicial body, the grand jury is supposed to be kind of separate from that, trying to make some of these changes and some of these assumptions, I think is part of the problem that we're dealing with right now. Anyway, again, Jacob Dye over at the Peninsula Clarion has got a good write-up on this. If you want to go over there to the Clarion and take a look at it. So in July, the Department of Law rolled out a new process for Alaska residents to request an investigation by the grand jury. And it's kind of a formalized online, everything else. And so Treg Taylor gave the step-by-step explanation of the new system, which he said was not something that they had determined, but it was created after the Supreme Court issued this essentially executive order. It's a Supreme Court order that required his department to review requests to determine if they meet the requirements to be brought before a grand jury. Now, what this does is this creates an additional step and an additional blocking force, or I think later on what something like David Haig talked about, gatekeeping, because the Constitution doesn't say anything about bringing the information to the Department of Law to then to see whether or not it needs to. It said the people have the power to go to the grand jury and ask for an investigation. But the courts have created this speed bump, as you were. And of course, the grand jury is a group of 12 to 18 citizens who consider evidence to charge a person with a felony crime, but also an investigative grand jury. That's the indictment part of it. And then the presentment part of it is the investigative grand jury, where they do an investigation and then they present whatever evidence that they have forward to see if there needs to be charges filed. Now, foremost, Treg Taylor had said that the department's new system is an improvement that helps people get issues brought before these groups. And now everybody knows it's public what the process is. He said before it launched this year, there was no formalized avenue for people to request an investigation. So while some of these ideas may be laudable, that they're trying to simplify the process, I guess, again, the main problem and the main bone of contention amongst most people is that, investigative grand juries for anything other than government malfeasance, this may make sense. But the problem is when you are trying to bring an investigation into what you perceive as government corruption or a problem with a governmental process, you're now asking the government for permission to investigate that governmental process. How do you think that's going to work out? Right? That's kind of the holdup. If it's something non-governmental, okay, I guess you asked it. But again, that's not what the Constitution says. So when it comes down to it, they created this new process, and they created it's now it's an all online thing. The forums that are online ask people to specify what they're alleging about and about whom, what evidence they have, and who else might be able to corroborate. The petitioner would then need to print and sign an attestation form and have their signature notarized. And then their allegations would be considered by a rotating panel from within the Department of Law, who will determine whether the allegation is credible and whether to bring it to a grand jury. So you've got a committee of appointed or hired or bureaucrats who would then decide whether or not your allegations are credible and bring it to a grand jury, which again may be fine if you're asking for an investigation into Jim Bob down the street who's done something illegal and you have proof of it. But when you're talking about we'd like to have an investigation into something in government, specifically even inside their own department in the Department of Law, you've got a rotating panel within the department who's going to determine whether or not they should bring. Can you see the conundrum? Can you see the problem here? And I mean, this is kind of where I'm kind of setting up. This is the whole issue to begin with. But there was a lot of pushback on this. There was dozens and dozens of people who got up and testified on this on Monday, and it got a little heated. But Treg Taylor did make some comments, and we're going to get into that here in a second, that I think, well, we'll get into it in a second. How about that? I don't want to get too far along here before I run out of steam on this one. All right, we got more coming up. We're going to continue this discussion on this, and then when we come back, we're also going to talk about the Education Task Force and the new teachers union request from the Anchorage School District, which is going to answer the question of how much money is enough money, and the answer is all the monies, all the monies. All right, we're going to be back. Don't go anywhere. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay. Hello. How are you guys? How's everything going on? What's going on? Let's see let me see what's happening. Scrolling backwards. Okay, good morning. Wow. Brian set the bar high this morning. Brian, how are you? I'm upright, drinking coffee, and not crying. I'm not crying, you are. I feel you, man. This isn't new, says Kelly. Many of us started screaming about this during COVID. No one would listen until now. Are you complaining that nobody's going to listen until now, Kelly? I mean, we've been talking about this on and off for a year on the program. So, I mean, I don't know. Aren't you happy that somebody's talking about it now? Treg is now the gatekeeper to the grand jury, but says he doesn't want to be. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, again, part of the issue. Robb Myers is in the chat room already. The task force has already telegraphed what their results will be by saying they're looking at the last 10 years of funding. The 15 years before that gives us a completely different answer. Yeah, I mean, again, just the makeup of the task force tells me all I need to know at this point. Again, complete and total theater. Or as Chris says, fake news. All right. Good morning. It's not true. There was no process. The truth is, the process was very simple, but okay. So Kevin's saying it's not true that there was no process. The truth is, the process was very simple, but one that the judicial branch cannot control, and that might be part of it for sure. Okay. Thanks for the wake up. Frank says, if you make a formal complaint on an attorney, guess what happens? A panel of attorneys review your documents. How many complaints get past the review process? We'll see. All right. Good morning. It was nice to see you yesterday, Sybil. I saw Sybil, ran into Sybil yesterday when I was out and about in the world, and she stopped me in the store. All right. So we're all caught up on all the commentary here this morning. I hope you guys are ready to go. Would you do me a favor? Would you, there's a little button there that says share. Would you share it for me? Would you share all the goodness that is the show to see if we can get some more folks involved? Have you guys also followed me over on YouTube? I got a new I've been posting up new YouTube shorts over there. I was traveling yesterday, so I didn't get a chance to post the ones that I put together, but I'm going to post those this morning, plus some of the ones that I'm going to put together today. Wow. Jumped right up there. It's things got hot and heavy. So anyway, if you want to take a look at that, you can subscribe and ring the bell over on YouTube, and those shorts should start populating in your feed here shortly. We went from 100 views yesterday to 700, 800, 900 views for the things today. So they're starting to get some traction out there. We'd like to get more people involved in the process. That's what we need to do. All right. We're going to get back into this. You guys ready to go? Let's do this thing. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Let's get this going on. Here we go. Well, I guess I'm a little early here. I still got 6 seconds. So I'll bloviate for, no, we're just going to go. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay. So we're going to continue our discussion here on the meeting on Monday, where Treg Taylor faced a group of agitated citizens in the Kenai. And kudos to Taylor for coming out and actually meeting with people. I mean, that's his job, but, they could avoid it because that's how it works. And I think the biggest problem here, and I think it was Ken's comment in the chat room that made the most sense on this. When I said that there wasn't a process, the process was just, there was no details on the process. This process was simple. He said, the truth is the process was very simple, but one that the judicial branch cannot control. And that might be part of the issue here. I mean, I could definitely see that, because that is part and parcel of the issue, is that, bureaucracies and everything, they want something predictable, right? They want to be able to control it. They want to be able to understand it. And freedom is messy. We talked a little bit about this yesterday or day before, that, the problem with freedom, if there could be said to be a problem, is that it's messy. That's the thing. Freedom gives you the ability to do things that, in some cases are hard to quantify or control or direct. Freedom is messy. And so sometimes the most simplistic things are hard for people to wrap their brains around, because they want a process, they want a system, they want dependability, they want reliability, they want stability. And yet that freedom or that simplicity sometimes just kind of blows people's minds. And in some ways, it's also about, like, as we said, the control of it, for sure. So Treg Taylor goes on to talk about the process, and talks about how that the one thing that it also does is that it creates a public record of the investigations. Because up until this point, there would be no way of knowing if something that up until this change, he's saying, there'd be no way of knowing that an investigation that you're requesting has not already been done, because everything was held under such strict guidelines for confidentiality that you know, you could be basically asking for requesting an investigation for something that's already been done and found to be baseless, because obviously if there was something there, then it would be passed over to the other part of the grand jury for indictment, right? But he said the new process allows for public records to be created. A grand jury is held under strict guidelines for confidentiality, such that if a request is brought before them and they decide to not investigate, or investigate and decide not to issue a charge or report, there would not be any disclosure. Taylor said that his department would make public a report of what requests are brought and whether they were forwarded to a grand jury and what, if anything, comes out of their investigation. Which, I mean, is great, but again, where's the report on the whole Marla Greenstein thing that they have refused up till this point to produce? I mean, I think that's one of the bones. You know, great, you're highlighting this new reporting process, but you've got one in the wings right now that you could release. And whether it's, I mean, it could be a nothing burger. This report could say nothing, could say that it's all, but why are we continuing to hide the report? Again, if there's nothing in it, then why are you sitting on it? Why are you creating more drama when it doesn't need to be? But if there is something in it and you're sitting on it, well, now we've got some issues, right? Anyway, Taylor continued to say that it was important for this reporting mechanism that they're using, that it be in the public eye. When allegations go to a grand jury and they don't choose to create a public report, no one outside the grand jury learns anything about any investigation that occurred. And he said he can't say when allegations are brought forward or were they already investigated or found not to be credible. Or he gets, again, this is the whole change to the new system. He said that they're going to create a database and then it would be searchable to a certain extent, but the details like the accuser's name would be redacted, but there'd be an overview of each complaint visible to the public and everything else. Now, as of the day after this meeting, there is no such database that is available to the public. So they've created this whole process, but at this point, they're not done. They don't have a link. You can't go find that data. Is this aspirational or is it supposed to be happening? I think it's a valid question. Are you working on it or should it be there already? Or is this what if? Anyway, there were a bunch of people there, 60, 70 people in the chamber, and another 40 or so were on the line virtually. So almost 100 people. Of course, David Haig, who has been a vocal advocate for grand jury rights, was there. And in recognition of his I guess position kind of as the point of the spear on this, he got a special 5-minute opportunity when other people were given 3 minutes. But then he spoke for 11 minutes, which is, okay. Anyway, it was it was a pretty passionate thing, right? Because he's been fighting this for a long time, and he's been on the program, and I thought he did very well in trying to discuss the issues and everything else. But this is a pretty deep issue. And so this kicked off a huge comment period that stretched over an hour beyond what the scheduled hearing, how long the hearing was supposed to be. And in fact, it's the story comments that Taylor and his staff had to reschedule their flights out of Kenai to be able to keep the meeting going. And so good on them, again, for listening to the public, whether it was comfortable or not. They stood around and they sat around and stayed until it was over, which is good for them again. But then Haig pointed out a lot of the problems with this new policy that we've talked about here just recently. And we just, again, refreshed up at the beginning of the hour. The new DOL process positively states that citizens cannot appeal directly to the grand jury. But that's not what the Constitution says. He said, we are not going to be kept away from the grand jury. No one is going to be the gatekeeper, not on my watch. that was a phrase that was then picked up by many of the people who were commenting on this. Taylor said, for his point, Treg Taylor said he doesn't want to serve as any kind of gatekeeper. And he blamed the state Supreme Court for issuing its ruling in 2022 that said the state's attorney general has to review allegations before they can be brought to a grand jury. This all goes back to that the Supreme Court order. 19, I've forgotten what the number is. That Supreme Court order where they said they're the ones that created this framework, which again raises a bunch of questions about, one, the separation of powers, and two, the validity of this order where, who's watching the watchers kind of thing, where we talked about, you're saying the grand jury, which one of its primary functions is, again, as an investigatory body against government corruption, you're asking citizens to go to the government with allegations of corruptions against the government to let the government decide if they should be investigating the government. Do I got that right? Do I have all the details there? Because before this, they didn't have to. They could just go to the grand jury and say, I have allegations of this. And then the grand jury would be informed or guided by their independent attorney. That's another bone of contention here. Don't give me a Department of Law attorney. Give me independent counsel. Although, as Treg Taylor acknowledges, there is a small pool of available attorneys in the state, and many of those have ties to the Department of Law. So maybe we need to be doing something a little different here. Maybe we need to be doing something. I mean, maybe we should have an attorney that works in the ombudsman's office, maybe, or some kind of independent, has nothing to do with the Department of Law. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But, a grand jury will need some kind of legal guidance because these are average citizens. They don't necessarily understand all the details of the judicial process, but they should have one that is completely independent from the Department of Law. Anyway, he blamed the Supreme Court's ruling and their special order. And he said and then he called for the legislature to correct it. The legislature has the power to basically nullify that Supreme Court order and say, no, we're going to go back to what the Constitution says, which is the public has direct access to the grand jury, and that there is no speed bump to get in between. And again, that we need an independent prosecutor or independent legal counsel for the grand juries to be able to make sure that everything's up to snuff legally and everything else. But it should be an independent entity with no ties to the government. Taylor went on to say, this gatekeeper is going to be like the blindfolded goalie. A lot of things are going to get through because, first of all, public trust is at an all-time low, and we've got to do something about that. You're damn right it's at an all-time low because we are seeing, and whether it's, again, reality or just perception, remember, in many people's minds, perception is reality. When there is a perceived conflict of interest, in this case, you're worried about government corruption and you have to go to the government to ask it to investigate itself for corruption. Of course, there's going to be an all-time low in trust on that. How does it not make sense to you to see that? And anyway, Taylor said the issues being raised and the hard questions brought to the assembly chambers on Monday were expected and come from people who are passionate about the issue. The goal, says Treg Taylor, is to restore public confidence in the judicial system by creating a transparent process that ensures people have reasonable access to an investigative grand jury. I'm glad that he's articulating the problem. He's basically saying, and I'm reading between the lines here and paraphrasing, but he's basically saying, my hands are tied because this is what the courts have said, and I'm, a slave to the system. And so we've created this framework because that's what the court said to do. But the legislature has the power to change it back to where it needs to be. That's essentially what he's saying. And I can see that he's bound by certain rules and has to do things as the attorney general. But I think that he should have been a lot more vocal about this a lot sooner. That rule was put out in 2022. It's now 2025. Oh, but he's running for governor, so maybe this is a springboard to, I don't know. I mean, I can pontificate all you want. But again, this is the first time that he's met and had a public meeting about this. It's like they've quietly wanted this thing to be just kind of shoveled under the rug, and then say, oh, David Haig, he's that crazy guy, right? David Haig brings up he's got an axe to grind. There's no two ways about it. He's got an axe to grind. But he is not wrong. He's not wrong about what's happening with the system and the fact that the checks and balances that were set up by the framers of the state constitution are being undermined by the judiciary. He's not wrong. And yet, everybody's been quiet up until now. So congratulations for Treg. And I want to get Treg Taylor on the program to talk about it. I want him to come on the show and discuss this with us. Because maybe, he said that this is the Supreme Court's fault. He's just following the directive that the Supreme Court has laid out. He does have a responsibility to again follow the court's orders, but again, why is this the first? We're just hearing about this now, and it's because people like David Haig and Ben Carpenter, etc., have been raising such a stink about it. Again, the one chance that we have as citizens to hold government accountable, one of the primary avenues we have to investigate our own government, and now we've created a gate, a speed bump right in front of that, where we can't go directly to the grand jury. That's the problem, in a nutshell. All right, I'm going to get off this topic. I got to get off this topic. We're going to come back to this here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back. Don't go anywhere. Right after this.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay. Who gets to stop those that are violating our Alaska state constitution then? Along with this creates a serious ethics violation. I mean, again, this is who the thing we keep coming back to is who is watching the watchers. The grand jury is an integral part of that fundamental check on government. And now you've got the judiciary, which is already under allegations of problems, right? With the whole Greenstein thing and all that kind of stuff. There are already, and now they are creating a new rule that basically says you got to come to us to ask to investigate us. That's a problem. That's a real problem. Okay. If the Supreme Court creates a process that's unconstitutional, the AG has every right to tell them to pound sand. I would argue you're correct on that. That is something that the AG would have the power to say, you can't do that, courts. And it is the Alaska Supreme Court, so this would immediately have to go to the federal level, I believe, right? So we'll see. Robb Myers says the legislature could fix it, but it takes a 2/3 vote to alter a court order. And who holds the gavel to let a bill be heard and move forward? Yeah. Who has the power? And I think isn't Clayman part of the, isn't he the head of the judiciary? Clayman, an attorney who, again, I've just remembered of the old Shakespearean line. The first thing we do is we delete all the lawyers. Miguel says, which one of our representatives will step up for us? Is this step up for us, or is this one of those wow. I don't know what Miguel's trying to say there. I thought it was a little clearer before I started reading. Which one of our representatives will step up for us? Or is this one on us to step up as a private citizen? There we go. Well, I think we have to step up as private citizens. I think anytime we see something like this that is blatantly, when it's described on its face to be unconstitutional, it's on us to step up and move and talk about it. But that doesn't absolve our representatives of a responsibility in this. Again, one of the main functions of the grand jury in the investigative process is to hold government accountable. And now you're asking the people to go to the government to ask the government to investigate itself. How do you think that's going to work out? We can wish and hope, and yet they don't have the intestinal fortitude to take it on. No, I mean, because again, there's too many special interests in this thing. Rob continues to say, the biggest problem is that a grand jury operates in a courtroom and can be dissolved by a judge if he doesn't like what's happening, which again is not constitutional. They don't have the power to dismiss a grand jury, only under certain circumstances. The Citizens Initiative, a citizens initiative can change the grand jury statutes, but not the Constitution, says Ben Carpenter. This is obviously something that we need to continue to fight about and to dive into, because this is a hot mess. And I think one of the reasons, and this is me being blatantly honest, I've never met Treg Taylor. I don't know him. I have questions, right? But to me, this issue, which has been in play since 2022, he is just now addressing it, in my opinion. No aspersions. But in my opinion, he's just addressing it now because he's about to run for governor. They could have addressed this issue a year ago, 2 years ago. Ben, when was the first time that somebody brought that up to you? I think you and I first talked about this 2 years ago in generalities, because we didn't have all the details yet. But I think it was 2 years ago that we first talked about it. And so he had the opportunity then. But now we're going to address it because, one, it's come to a head and we're all talking about it. And two, he's about to run for office. And so he needs to, be able to paint a W on the side of his cowling, right? Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
Okay. It's a very interesting conversation. And again, I was just saying that, Treg Taylor has had an opportunity. I mean, he threw the Supreme Court under the bus and said they're the ones that have caused this, since they wrote it. But again, they passed this special order in 2022. So 3 years ago. And I think it was 2 years ago that we first talked about it on the show in some broad generalities because we didn't have a lot of the details at the time. But he's only now actually coming out and addressing the people. And I hate to say it, but my perception is that the only reason he's actually addressing it now is because he's planning on running for governor. That this is a way to bring this and maybe use this as a campaign issue. And somebody made a very valid point in the chat room that as the Attorney General, if something is put forward that is not constitutional, and in this case, I would argue that the order from the Supreme Court violates the Constitution by placing a barrier in between the public and the grand jury, because that's the Constitution clearly states that the public should have access to the grand jury. And this, and again, even though it doesn't mention the state in that process, the idea that somehow putting a state speed bump in the middle between the people and the grand jury, I think it's pretty clearly unconstitutional. The Attorney General would have the right to fight that, would have the right to go back against that and say, nice try, but that's not really constitutional. And I'm interested to know more about this. Ben Carpenter just said there's a must-read Alaska Show podcast with Treg Taylor on YouTube. So he apparently got Treg Taylor on the program. Good on you, Ben. I'd like to I'd like to have him on the program here as well. I'll have to go back and watch your show vicariously, and we'll have to see if I can pick some pieces apart on that. But that whole thing is, again, this meeting was pretty passionate. Did we get any real fixes or any real answers? No, we don't know any more than what we do right now, other than Treg Taylor said, take it to the legislature, because the legislature should do it. But as Robb Myers points out in the chat room, the legislature could fix it, but to override or alter a court order, it takes a 2/3 vote. It's not simple majority. It's a 2/3 vote of the legislature. And who holds the gavel to let a bill be heard and move forward? That would be attorneys. Bill Wilikowski, I think, is Rules Committee chair. And then you got Matt Clayman, I think, who's on the Judiciary Committee, who chair. So you've got a bunch of attorneys who are part. Again, we've got issues. We've got issues here on this. All right. So we're gonna see what goes on with that. What was the other story? Sorry, we're not even going to get a chance to get into the whole education funding task force. I do want to revisit some of that, and maybe we'll take some time on Monday to revisit this, because again, I still have some serious issues. And again, Robb Myers pointed out that they have already telegraphed what they're doing, because they said that their plan is to go back and look at the last 10 years of funding in education. Whereas if they went back and looked at the last 15 years of funding, it would tell a very different story than the last. So they're already limiting themselves in scope on this. And again, the one thing that I realized is that I've been saying the education task force, but it's really an education funding task force. And I guess my one commentary on this whole thing is they're going to use this as a stop, as a bulwark against any policy changes. Because what they'll tell you is, we can't make any policy changes until the task force has given us their recommendation, which won't be until 2027. So it's a stall on any policy changes. They will be asking for more money. Now, it works in the other way too, because the other side could basically say, well, we're not going to talk about funding until after the task force recommendations are out. Then we can argue about it. So it can work both ways, but there will be, I can guarantee you, they're going to use it as some kind of policy stall to say, we can't talk about policy until the task force gives us their recommendations, which won't be until, 2027. And then we got the latest from the teachers union in Anchorage. Their contract has expired. It expired in June. And the contracts all have an evergreen clause in them. So basically they remain in place until the new contract. They say that our contract, we're working without a contract. Well, technically true because the contract is expired, but there's always a provision in there that basically says we'll continue to operate under the auspices of that contract until a new, so it's evergreen, right? The contract is officially over, but all the things you got in that contract continue on until a new contract is instituted, right? And so they've got new proposals that are coming in. The Anchorage Employee or Anchorage Education Association is now in the midst of a new contract negotiation, and they're asking for higher compensation because they say that Anchorage is the one of the most uncompetitive places in the state. It's not very competitive, and they have extreme turnover, and we have a number of resignations and et cetera, et cetera. So the union's asking for a higher compensation to remain competitive with other school districts in the state. As well, in addition, they're asking for broader health care benefits and compensation for time spent moving classrooms or buildings. You've got to go to another classroom, so they want special pay for that. Or we're going to move you to another building. And they want, we just called that doing our job back in the day, but I guess there's some, the district's own proposal had made some of the same argument, but there are disparities as to how much they were offering and how much they were willing to give. And so the negotiations are going to continue. The district recently reallocated a bunch of funds, resulting in nearly 50 new full-time positions. And while the unions support that, they said they need to up their game on the compensation as well. So basically, it's more money. More needs to come out of this whole thing. Surprise! How much money is enough money? All of the money. All of the money. That's how much is enough money. All right, we got to go. We're going to be back with more in a minute. Robb Myers is going to be joining us. We're going to be talking about SJR 14. And we'll be back. Permanent fund discussion up next. The Michael Luke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Okay. We gotta go. Let's see. Ken just said we need Harold to be governor. Woo! Yikes. Brian just posted a YouTube link. I don't know what that link's to because I can't follow it, but I'm sure it's good. Brian's always got some good stuff. There are a lot of things the legislators could fix, but there's no political will. And she mentions ranked choice voting, says Cindy. They could. Again, no political will. Why would they? It's helping them out. It's helping them out. I'm going through here. But competitive is unfair. Some people can't be competitive, and we need to be more inclusive of competitively disadvantaged people. Yes, I can see that. We can't be competitive because some people just can't hack it. Trophies for everyone. Brian asks, how many members does it take to keep the teachers, or Ben asks, how many members does it take to keep a teachers union solvent? What if there were an alternative? Coming soon. I want to hear more about it, Ben. Maybe we should have you on the program on Monday to discuss it. Lisa over in Nikolaevsk says they still haven't got, the Kenai Peninsula School District still hasn't gotten out of the Nikolaevsk school building. They want more money because they're realizing how much it takes to do the work. Wow, I know. I helped and got paid $0. Oh, man. Oh, and Ben's got a new must-read article out. So we should be looking at that as well. All right, thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. All right, let's check in with our resident truck driving genius here. This is Robb Myers. He's one of my good friends here. Hello, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Michael. I think you give me a little bit too much credit there, but sometimes signing in on your software here, sometimes it's like a seance. Can you hear me? I can hear you. Can you see us? Everybody else, can you see him? Yeah, it
is a little bit like, sometimes it's like a seance, but the one thing that they did provide us here again recently, a few months ago, was the permanent link, right? So we always know that it's the same link, which is good because if you've been on before, chances are it's all going to work just the same, So, but it's a pretty good piece of software, and like I said, now I'm starting to utilize it for helping me to pull out cuts and clips and things like that. It does all the closed captioning, and it throws the stuff up on the screen and everything. So I mean, it's the best of what I got right now, but and it sounds good. I mean, it sounds better than the audio quality. Forget about the video. The audio quality is generally speaking better than any telephone call. So it's been pretty good so far. So,
yep.
You all ready to dive into this though?
Oh, most definitely. Okay.
Definitely. And so you need a background, Rob, says Brian. You need a background. Maybe a big Kenworth logo behind you. Maybe that's what you need. We should get a picture of the grill of a truck so it looks like it's about to run Rob down behind him, right? Just sitting there. Boom, All right. Truckers are on permanent driving vacation.
Well, to Ben's point, I have long said that truckers are actually paid to be tourists.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. I mean, I love me some window time. I love to drive. That's one of my favorite things. I don't mind to climb in a car and drive for 5 hours. I'm okay with that. Give me a good music or an audiobook or a podcast or something.
5 hours, it's a short day.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, that's great. I'd love to look at the, so you're right. It's good. It's good stuff. All right. We're going to continue on here. This is the same background in use at photos at the post office. That's true. It's true. All right, we're going to put Rob back into the green room, and he's going to hang out there and eat all my donuts while we're continuing on here. All right, folks, we are going to get ready to go. Yeah, that's right. It has to be a picture of a grill of a Kenworth, but it must be completely covered with mosquitoes and dragonflies. That's it must be completely packed with mosquitoes and dragonflies to be authentic. That's it right there. That's exactly it right there. All right. We're gonna go. I think we're all caught up. And I think we're all good. Yeah, Ben, I think we need to have him on the program next week. Let's see if we can talk Ben into coming on maybe on Monday and having a conversation with us about his latest article in Must Read, which I haven't read yet because he just linked it, but we'll get back to it. Okay. Here we go. Let's jump into it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more in just a sec.
Buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello, friends. How are you doing? You ready to go? Hour 2 of the big radio broadcast, and we are all ready to do it. Let's get on board and get things going. Our guest this hour is going to be Robb Myers, who's going to be joining us this morning and talking about SJR 14, which has to do with the permanent fund and the fund itself, and it's Senate Joint Resolution 14, which you're going to be hearing a lot about in the coming seasons here. So let's just get started and get right to it, and bring our friend Robb Myers onto the program here to discuss it. Hey, Robb, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great so far this morning, Michael. How about you?
There are no complaints. I mean, nobody listens anyway, so it's all good. So first and foremost, let's get down into some nitty gritty here. Can you give us a thumbnail of what SJR 14 entails? We know it's about the fund, the corpus of the fund, give us the details of what SJR 14 actually does before we dive into some of the reasoning and everything that goes before it. So let's talk there.
So SJR 14 is relatively straightforward in terms of its mechanics. It does two things. Number one, it's going to combine the corpus of the fund and the ERA into a one account structure instead of the current 2 account structure that we've been operating on since the fund was created in the 70s. Number two, it takes that 5% POMV draw and it throws it into the Constitution so that the legislature could never draw more than 5% it's an average in 1 year. So that 5% average is created by, you take the total value of the fund over the last 5 years, you average that out, and then you take 5% of that. And that's what we've been doing since 2018. This would then just put that into the Constitution. One of the funny things about SJR 14, you can kind of see how this the groundwork has been laid for this constitutional amendment for a few years now. We've seen kind of some news stories since about 2022-ish was when you first started seeing them coming out saying, oh, well, we've got this one account structure. We have some problems with it. And it's interesting how the reasoning behind it has changed. Because the first arguments was, the ERA isn't going to have enough money in it, so we're going to have to. It's not going to have enough money to meet that 5% draw. And I think Brad was on a few times talking about how it looked like there was some funny accounting going on, the way they were accounting for things to argue that there was not going to be enough money in the draw, or excuse me, enough money in the ERA for the draw. And so the argument was, well, we have to combine the 2 accounts to make sure we have enough cash on hand to make that 5% draw. Then over this last year or so, there's been a new argument come up, and it said, oh, well, no. The problem isn't we don't have enough money. The problem is we have too much money in the ERA. because the legislature could overdraw it. It could draw above the 5%. And I'm looking here going, well, which is it, guys? Which one of those is the problem? Because if they're both the problem, that sounds to me like you're fishing for a you're fishing for a reason to want to do this.
Right.
And
Right.
And let's not forget that some of this was, it was kind of an artificial created crisis. The argument was, well, we don't have enough money in the ERA. Well, let's remember part of the reason why is because the legislature transferred extra money out of the ERA into the corpus twice in order to pull money out of the ERA to force this to happen.
Right.
So first in 2019, the legislature tried to do a $12 billion transfer, and they called it future inflation proofing. But they that effectively would have transferred the entire ERA over to the corpus. Now, fortunately, the governor vetoed that down. He vetoed it down to 4.9. But then in 2021, the legislature passed another $4 billion to transfer over. And if you look at inflation proofing, that has not happened a couple of years since then. So that we didn't do inflation proofing in 2020. We didn't do inflation proofing in, this year. And I think there was one other year, I think it was in 23. There's currently about $2 billion extra in the corpus that should be in the ERA because because the legislature transferred so much extra over. So last year on the floor, I got up and said, I ran a floor amendment on the budget and said, hey, we have too much money there. We're complaining about this problem of not having enough money in the ERA. So I said, well, let's pull the inflation proofing for last year. And that failed on the floor spectacularly because people are trying to create a crisis. And personally, I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to be skeptical of any claim from a group that tries to create a crisis to push a particular policy. So that right off the bat is a red flag to me.
Well, and again, this is the whole problem with what's going on. I mean, this is a crisis that has been created. As you said, first of all, there's too much money is the first argument. They try and transfer a bunch out. And now, again, that was the reasoning. And now the reasoning has become, well, there's not enough money. Well, you legislature, you are the ones in control of telling how much money. And again, this whole inflation proofing, the future proofing, as we called it at the time, it seems like they forgot about that, right? Like 2 years later, they're like, well, we need to do inflation proofing. Well, wait, you just transferred $5 billion in there. Why are you still inflation proofing when you said this future proofing was going to take care of it for the foreseeable future? Oh, well, and then they transferred more. And that's, you're 100% right. Any group that claims that we've got to do this because it's a crisis, when they, the ones themselves, are the one that created the crisis intentionally, immediately raises some red flags. And here's the problem overall. Since 1999, that was the first year that they attempted to get the POMV issue passed in front of the people. They have been attempting, because the POMV is the first step in getting access to the corpus of the fund.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it's about. The POMV in and of itself is fine if government controls itself. I mean, it's fine if it does that. But the problem is, we know that there's not, and they're going to overdraw. And then eventually they'll say, well, we've got to have access to the corpus because we don't have enough money to run government. So we've known since 1999 that the politicians' wet dream is to get access to the constitutionally protected portions of the fund, because then, well, I mean, the fund's got $80 billion in it. That's a big piggy bank. That's a big pool of money to be able to do, make all your political dreams come true.
So, and let's talk about that a little bit. The original way the fund was set up, the draw coming out of it, which initially just for the dividend, we know that, but whether you're going to draw for the dividend or you're going to draw for government, I think these things kind of still apply. The initial way that the draw was set up is it was based on the earnings. Earnings went up, the draw went up. The earnings went down, the draw went down. And we had a little smoothing factor in there because, again, it was a 5-year average of the earnings, not just the, not just that year's earnings, because remember, we have had a couple of years where the earnings were negative. And hence we wouldn't have had a dividend if it wasn't for that 5-year smoothing. But what we're doing by changing to a POMV model of a percent of market value model is we are managing it not to preserve the fund, but we are now using the draw, managing it to preserve the spend at the government level. See, because there's lots of ways to manage a fund, and each of them have different priorities. But the best health of the fund is going back to something similar to the old model. The best health of the fund would tie draws to earnings, and perhaps maybe even include the ability to be negative. And what the Permanent Fund Corporation has been telling us for years now is that, the point here is to have a stable and predictable distribution. Well, but that is a problem here. What that's telling us is that the priority is the money coming out, not the health of the fund itself. The health of state spending requires the distribution to be stable, not the health of the fund. The health of the fund requires the distribution to be variable based on earnings. And so that right there is a serious problem too.
No, and I would agree. And as we look at this, we start talking about things like, well, the draw rate. The draw rate is pretty high, 5%. The fund has not been earning 5%.
Right.
That's part of the problem there. And again, because now we're looking at structural problems with the permanent fund itself. The draw rate is too high. It's not returning what they say. They're not hitting their own benchmarks. Brad has pointed out that if you just tagged it and you just tied it to the Vanguard 500 or the S&P 500, the fund would have $30 billion more in it over the last 20 years than it would have today. We're paying 1% of the fund value in management fees. That's almost $1 billion in management fees every year, compared to like the Harvard Fund and some of the other funds that are S&P 500 type funds, which are paying a quarter of that. So there's a lot of functional problems inside the fund itself, including that the draw rate is, put a boot on my head, the draw rate is too damn high kind of thing, right?
No, you're 100% right, because we say 5%, and so we think, you earn 5%. 5% is an easy target to hit, but no, that's not the only part of it. You have to hit 5% plus inflation, and we know how variable that is and how high that's been lately, and then the management fees, as you already mentioned. And if you look at that benchmark of 5% plus inflation plus the management fees, in the 1, the 3, and the 5-year benchmarks, the fund has not met it at any of those levels in the last few years. And in fact, in the last 6 years, basically the 6 years that we've been drawing from it, we've only hit that target 1 year out of the last 6. Now, if it was the other way around, we hit it 5 years out of 6, hey, we're golden. Okay, that's the point of the 5-year average. But when you're only hitting it 1 year out of 6, you got some serious problems here. The Permanent Fund Corporation has said that they did not hit that target any 10-year period between 2008 and 2018. That's a huge period of time to not hit that target and then say, this is the way we're going to look at. So the last projection that I looked at, which I believe was at the end of June, coming from the Permanent Fund Corporation, was they were projecting the earnings to be 5.4%. But they were assuming inflation of 2.5%. So a real rate of earning of only 2.9%. That's a serious problem here. So the rolling average helps, but it's meaningless if your draw rate outpaces earnings on a regular basis. The Permanent Fund Corporation was in with the legislature a few months ago, and they told us that there is a 46% chance that we don't have enough money in the ERA to make the scheduled draw in the next few years. To me, what that is saying is that we are drawing faster than we're earning, and it really means that we have a 46% chance that the draw rate is too high. Now, here's the problem.
That is the problem. I mean, right, you're taking too much money out of the fund. And again, a real return of 2.9% accounting for inflation, plus, again, you're not even talking about the management fees, which have to be beyond that. Of course, you've created a problem. You've transferred eight, almost $9 billion from the ERA into the corpus of the fund, and now you're like, oh, it's too much. You're creating this issue. The goal is, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but the goal here is to get access to the corpus. That's really what the goal appears to be.
The goal is to continue the gravy train that we have been on for 50 years, that we spent way more than we should have with oil. And now we're just saying, let's do the same thing and we'll move it over to using the permanent fund instead of oil because we don't have enough oil money anymore to do what we want. So we're going to use the permanent fund. And, like a lot of the problems that we talk about on this show, there's the math problem and there's the political problem. See, the math problem is easy to solve. The math problem is drop the draw rate, lower the draw rate, and you fix 95% of the issues here.
Right.
But here's our problem.
Yeah.
Which could be done. You could either lower it in the constitutional amendment itself, you knock it down to 4.5, something in that neighborhood, or you could just say, oh, well, the Constitution says we can take 5, but we're really only going to take 4 this year. You could do that, but remember what that means. That means that the legislature would have to spend less money. What is the political will to spend less money in this state? I go back to 2022, okay? Oil prices spiked after Russia invaded Ukraine. We had, to quote one member of the legislature, more money than we knew what to do with. So what did I do? I went on the Senate floor and I put in a budget amendment to cancel the POMV draw that was going to government that year, saying, if oil's giving us more money than we know what to do with, let's leave the money in the permanent fund because we don't need it, okay? And we had enough money to do what we needed to do. So what happened? Well, it went down in flames, and the legislature decided to keep the draw. And instead of trying to save money to continue to grow the fund, they decided to spend it. We did nearly $1 billion supplemental that year, plus increasing money in the regular operating budget. So you tell me how much interest there is in lowering the draw rate. And one other thing that I want to point out, I had somebody point out to me recently that while it says 5%, the real draw rate lately has been more around 4.5 for the last few years because of the 5-year rolling average. That's true, but you gotta qualify that. It's true because we've been mostly in a rising market.
Right.
The reverse is also true. The effective draw rate will be higher than 5% if we're in a dropping market. So if we go back just to 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe, where the market drops significantly, now your 5-year average, because you got 1 or 2 good years in there at the beginning and the rest of it's bad years, your actual 5% rolling average becomes more like 5.5, 5.75 of what the current fund balance is. So we gotta keep that part in mind.
Yeah. Again, major problems. SGR 14 is what we're talking about. Robb Myers is our guest. We're going to continue with this. So again, what's the real reasoning? What's the bottom line? What's it going to take? We're going to continue with Robb Myers in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Dukes Show.
Robb Myers is our guest here on the program. Kind of sidebar here, Robb, outside of the SGR 14 discussion, but you've been kind of watching what Brad has been talking about with the management of the fund. And, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, this fact that we are not even hitting their own internal benchmarks, okay, which should be troubling. I mean, they try and put a positive spin on it every time they put something out. They try and put a positive spin on it. But the bottom line is, over the last 10 years, the fund is not hitting its own benchmarks, let alone, as Brad showed, if they had just invested the fund, between 10 and he's got the numbers running out from 10 to 20 years ago, if they just invested it and followed the vanguard of the S&P, I mean, we'd have $120 billion in the fund. So what's your thoughts on the management portion of the fund? I mean, especially since we're paying nearly $1 billion in management fees compared to what other funds are doing. What are your thoughts on Brad's commentary on that?
That's a tougher one for me to address. That's not, that's not quite as much my lane as it is looking at it from the government side, from the political side. I mean, it's extremely troubling, to say, oh, well, this passive management, gets you much better returns than the active management you got, and then there's been some arguments out there over the last few years that have said, well, if we combine the funds, then they're able to manage it better. And I'm looking at it going, they're not doing a great job managing it as it is. I don't see, the argument is, well, if you combine the funds and if you limit the draw rate constitutionally, then they're going to be able to go into longer term, higher yield things. And I'm sitting here going, well, your longer term, higher yield things, they're already in. They're already in things like real estate. They're already in things like private equity, where it's where your liquidity is much lower, where it's a lot harder to turn around and actually sell it and use the cash proceeds. So if we're already in that part that moving it to this new management structure would supposedly allow us to do, but that management structure that we're currently doing is not getting as good returns. Again, I don't see how that helps us with the fund itself. And I can keep coming back to, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next segment about what we use the money for and the effects of that. Is if you're not really sure if having and using the fund is a good thing to begin with, what's the point of making the fund more efficient, supposedly? I'm not sold that it's going to make the fund more efficient or better managed or anything, but what's the point of doing that if using the fund the way you want to, using the money, it actually is going to hurt us rather than help us?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Again, saying that, oh, this will make us more efficient. You're not doing a good job now. How is making it more? Does that mean you're going to get more efficient access to the money? I think that's probably the answer there. And again,
right, exactly. As I mentioned, what we're doing here with this by tying it to a POMV draw rather than tying it to earnings is we're managing it to preserve the spend. We're not managing it to preserve the fund.
Yeah. And proving yet again that a stop clock is right twice a day, Harold says, adequately funding only constitutional mandates, never been done since 1977. And that's part of the problem, is the state has fallen into that trap of trying to be all things to all people, right? They're trying
1969?
Yeah, 1969, maybe. Really, I mean, again, that first check came in almost $1 billion, and at the time, what was the budget at that time? 162 million for the state budget.
So it was 142 state funds, and there was a little bit federal on top of that. That's something else that's changed over the years. Is back then the federal portion of the budget was something like I think it was like 1/6 or 1/8 of the operating budget, and now it's over half is federal money. And that's scary for its own reasons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Ben says, as long as Alaskans believe that they can have a government that they don't have to pay for, the government will spend all available sources of money that isn't in Alaskans' pockets, and Alaskans will be okay with that. Again, that's where this is partially our fault for all this stuff, for sure. Absolutely. All right, we're about to jump back into this. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free, thick, and radio. Like and share, subscribe, ring the bell, share with people. Here we go.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
Yes, I am. Welcome back to the program, The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free, thick, and radio. Senator Robb Myers is our guest. We're talking about SJR 14, which is the constitutional proposal, to basically combine the earnings reserve of the fund and the corpus of the fund. The ERA is where the government draws their money to function. It's also where the PFD comes from. The corpus of the fund is constitutionally protected. It is the seed corn. It is the major component that we use to invest, and it's where the money that runs the state comes from. And this proposal would combine those two funds and allow, through a set draw amount, for the legislature to basically draw money out of this combined account, regardless of how well the earnings are doing. So if you don't earn the 5%, let's say you just only earn 4% that year, that extra 1% will come from the previously constitutionally protected corpus of the fund, which basically means you're strangling the golden goose that's laying the eggs, that's keeping you going. You're the farmer who is now eating your seed corn for next year, and you'll have less seed to plant. That's what it's all about here.
Right.
So another problem you were talking about, that you and I have talked about in the past on this, Rob, is that part of the problem with this is that it's not only is the draw too high, but it also removes the floor. Tell me what you're talking about with this.
Correct. So to your point, if you're starting to use it faster than it's coming in, what SGR 14 does by combining the accounts is it removes the floor. It removes the speed break. As of right now with the two accounts, you can only spend what's in the ERA. So if you are spending too quickly, then you know that there's a level at which, all right, this is how far it's going to go, and then it's going to stop. And now we're going to have to figure out what else to do to fund government or whatever, because now there's a level at which we cannot drop below, which as of right now, I think is about the fund is 84 billion. And I think the corpus is, I think it's about 62 of that. The rest of that's the ERA. Too high of a draw rate means that we're going to risk depleting the fund over time. At a minimum, the fund and the draws will grow nominally. They'll grow in the numbers, but they're not going to grow fast enough to keep up with inflation. Looks like what we're at right now. Worst case scenario, the fund and the draws will lower the actual overall value of the fund itself. So under the current structure, the principal is protected. It creates a floor in which the fund can't drop under. You can't go below that. But with the combined account, there is no floor. The only floor is zero when the whole thing's gone. Theoretically, we can draw until the fund is completely gone once you combine those accounts. So really what we're doing is we're substituting short-term certainty for long-term uncertainty. Right now, we've got the reverse of that. We've got some short-term uncertainty, but we've at least got long-term certainty.
Right.
We're going the other direction with that. That's the complete backwards of what you should be doing.
And that's an accelerating loop, right? Because as you start to draw into the corpus of the fund, you start to draw into the earnings power, then the next year you have fewer earnings. And because you have fewer earnings, you have to draw more from the corpus, from the earnings potential of the fund, and take more, which again, in turn, the next year creates less earnings. And then it just becomes this doom loop, this self-licking ice cream cone of you have less and less earning power and more spend. There is no incentive for people to lower the spend, unless, of course, they really truly care about the earnings power of the fund. But up until then, the politicians, as long as there's money in there, they're okay with it.
Correct. And the only time that we're going to lower the spend is when it finally runs out. I've heard one legislator comment, well, we don't need a spending cap because our spending cap is cash flow. You have less cash, you spend less. And we're going, okay, there's problems with that. What happens when you have, let's say 2022 when, Russia invades Ukraine and we end up with a whole ton of extra cash. But, that also is a flip side to that too, which is if you're going to depend on your cash flow to manage your spend, eventually you're going to have a mentality that's going to drop your cash flow because you spent it all too quickly.
Right. Well, I mean, again, the old plan, that would be true under the old plan. Your cash flow, is the spend. But if you only had what was in the earnings reserve and they were still two separate funds, then your artificial spending cap would be whatever's left in the fund. So you can't spend beyond what is there. And this looks like just a grab to make sure that, as you said earlier, we're managing to preserve the spend, not the fund. Preserving the fund is secondary, if at all. It's preserving the amount that we spend on government. That's the ultimate, protecting the protecting the public spend and the public economy and the government. That's what it is.
Right. And let's talk about that a little bit, because one of the major problems here, and we've been using this POMV model since 2018, is I don't think that we have fully explored the problems of using the fund as your primary revenue source for government. Okay. At a minimum, here's your first problem. Okay. We've got two primary sources of state funding. So let's not count the federal stuff here. You got oil and you got the permanent fund. Now the permanent fund is growing. Oil has been shrinking as a percentage of total state funding. But 15, 20 years ago, those two were counter-cyclical. As your oil prices went up, your stock market earnings tended to go down because the United States was a net oil importer. Okay. And then vice versa. The change since the shale revolution, the fracking revolution, so that the United States is now a net oil exporter, means the opposite is true. As oil prices go up, so do stock market earnings. But the reverse is also true. Oil prices go down, so do stock market earnings. So before, at least when we were talking about these two funding sources, we were talking about one balancing out the other. Now they reinforce each other. As the one drops, the other one's going to drop with it or close to it, again, because the one's on an average. But, we are increasing the boom bust cycle, not moderating it here. So we're doubling down on the direction of the national economy for our state's revenue. And that's another scary place to be. And then finally, the biggest point that I want to make, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is you talked about the permanent fund being your seed corn. Well, if you're going to talk about your seed corn, you better talk about where you're planting it. Okay. Are you planting it in the public economy? Or are you planting it in the private economy? We've had a lot of comments in the legislature this year. I think putting the Democrats in charge in both bodies has kind of opened, kind of freed people's mouths a little bit. We've had a lot of comments from people in the legislature this year that they view economic growth as a cost to state government. It's not a benefit, it's a cost. And what has allowed that to happen is having the permanent fund as our primary revenue source. By moving towards increased reliance on the permanent fund for state revenue, we've got less reason to want the private economy to grow because we don't need it. We can fund it without the private economy. So I think you and I talked about this last year. I did a little back of the envelope math that says that we could effectively end all oil drilling on the slope tomorrow. And I know that's not how it works, but let's just do the thought experiment here. You end all oil drilling on the slope tomorrow, and you add in a small broad-based tax of some kind, either sales or income, somewhere in the 2 to 4% range, depending on how you structure it. And you end the dividend. You just take the entire permanent fund draw and shove it over to government. You could then run the entire state between that permanent fund draw and that very small broad-based tax, assuming there was no PFD. And that's a scary place for us to be, because, effectively what you're then doing is you're just saying, okay, all you federal workers, all you state workers, all you guys that are working on state and federal contracts, we're just going to take a little bit of your paycheck and recycle it to make that the rest of the make up that little bit of a gap. And really what we're doing, and you see this pattern, not just with the permanent fund, but even with some of the other revenue measures that we've talked about, like that internet tax bill that got past the legislature this year. What we're doing is we're working to hide the true cost of spending from the people, so there's less pushback on the spending. There's less interest in a spending cap or anything else that might actually slow us down. And I know we're coming up on a break here. But
by hiding it, again, I said it earlier. Like I just said, I said it before. We have the largest stealth tax in the country. All this money is flowing directly to government, never touching our hands. We don't feel it. We're like, fine, just don't do anything. We're fine. Just keep going. Again, going back to Ben's comment of as long as we don't feel like it touches us, do whatever you want. And that is the danger point.
Right. America started on the concept of no taxation without representation, right? Well, the economists over the last 20 or 30 years have actually started saying the reverse is true as well. There is no representation without taxation. They invert that historical phrase, and it's for a good reason. Because as long as the government gets the majority of its revenue outside of the people as a whole, they won't care about the people's welfare as a whole. They don't have to care about the economy because that's not where their money is coming from. And Devin Mitchell, the head of the Permanent Fund Corporation, came in and presented to Senate Resources earlier this year. And he made an interesting comment, and I think maybe it was a bit of a Freudian slip on his part. He said that as we're moving towards using the permanent fund as our primary revenue source, we're effectively moving to where our government is kind of acting like it's retired, sitting back, using its savings account, using its earnings, the same way that an individual would use an IRA or a 401k. And so my question to everybody is, do we want a government that is retired or one that still has to work for a living by providing for a healthy economic climate for everybody rather than just healthy state spending to help people get reelected?
And that is the key point there. Again, this disconnect that we've talked about between the public and the private economy, where they don't really care. And in fact, in some cases, as you pointed out, they're saying that economic growth in the private economy actually costs the government an effective source. And that is part of the problem, for sure. Robb Myers is our guest. We are up against the break. We're going to continue here in just a moment, and we'll be back. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We will return in just a moment. Back with more right after this.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Robb Myers is our guest here, and this is the part where people immediately have a freak out, okay? Because the media, as soon as we start talking about things like you were just pointing out, Devin Mitchell's comment, and the idea that the old economists who are now flipping these things on their head to say there's no representation without taxation. That's really kind of a paraphrase of the cause that Hammond talked about when he said, fine, zero out the income tax, but don't take it off the books because it's the only thing that keeps people engaged. It's the only thing that keeps people connected. And look, I believe taxation is theft, right? Don't get me wrong. Don't get it twisted here. I think that taxation is definitely a problem. But when we are not connected to the way that our government is funded, we don't care. We just don't care.
Yeah, the scary part, and again, you and I have talked about this a lot over the last few years. But I wish that we would that more people in the legislature and in academia and in the business community in particular would talk about this. Is like, okay, we know taxes are bad. That has been true for centuries, and that hasn't changed. What we're figuring out in Alaska is there might actually be things worse than taxes, and we're not talking about that enough right now.
What do you think? And what, in your mind, what are the things that are worse than taxes in that regard?
Well, what's worse than taxes is when you have a government that has an ability to run itself off of some sort of revenue stream, and oil started us down this path. But if you have a government that has a revenue stream it does not have to be accountable to the people for, and where it changes the incentive, where at least with taxes, you have an incentive from the people that are being taxed to say, hey, slow your roll, guys, knock it off, stop spending so much money, or alternately, at least, spend it wisely, spend it on things that are useful, that are necessary, and do it well. And now you've got an incentive that says, oh, no, keep spending money because you guys have $80 billion. I want to get a piece of that, as an employee or a contractor or what have you, and everything that we talk about as, fraud, waste, and abuse within our system, to some people, that looks like fraud, waste, and abuse. To other people, it looks like a paycheck. And effectively, what we're saying is, let's take the people that don't have skin in the game, and they are the only ones that are going to fight against the people that do have skin in the game in terms of having a paycheck coming from government. You know, in normal systems, there's a tension there between those that make money from government and those that don't. But unfortunately, we don't have that tension there anymore in our system. And so it gets pulled completely into the direction of let's grow government some more.
Well, no, and it exacerbates it because, again, what we've created is basically corporate welfare, where we've got entire private business models that are based on that government spending, right? They've got whole contracts. And we've talked about companies that are into, road and infrastructure construction, or, telecoms like GCI, where they have hundreds of millions of dollars of government contracts. I mean, GCI back in 2016 spent $2 million in the public sector, or in the private sector, to try and convince people to give up a portion of their PFD, because their whole business model is based around that.
Well, there was just I was just reading it right before we came on the show today. There was a opinion piece in the ADN this morning of this guy saying that, what was it? Trump, Begich, and Dunleavy are the worst things that have ever happened to the Alaska construction industry, because they're canceling projects that are unnecessary, or that are picking winners and losers. And they're saying, well, this is putting my guys out of work. Okay. But if these are not good projects, then we shouldn't be building them. We shouldn't be funding them. But when your justification is it keeps people working, then that's a serious problem.
That takes us right back to the education thing, right? Which is, if you're not getting a good product, but you're continuing to spend money just to protect the jobs and the structure of the system itself, but still getting a poor result, that's also part of the problem. I mean, if the project's not needed, you shouldn't fund it, regardless if it keeps people employed. If the education system is not providing a good product, we shouldn't just keep throwing money at it to preserve the system. We've got to make changes. And this is pretty easy for most average people to go, okay, that makes sense to me. But to the politicians, it is the public sector above all else. That public spend has got to stay there.
Michael, I can't remember if you're on my mailing list or not. Did you get my latest newsletter? Came out at the end of July.
I did get your latest newsletter. Thank you.
Did you see the employment figure in there?
Yeah. It's walk people through it real quick here. We got about 30 seconds, but I don't have it in front of me to walk people through.
Yeah. So take government spending. Okay. And that's at all levels, federal, state, local. Okay. And then take the industries that are highly dependent on government spending. And so we took construction, healthcare, and utilities, which includes the telecoms like GCI. Okay. Add all of their employment together to figure out not just who's employed by the government.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I got to interrupt. We got to jump back in. Let's pick this back up on the other side, and we'll talk about it real quick here, but we got to get back into it here. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Let's do it.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Continuing with Robb Myers now, State Senator from the Interior. We've been talking about SGR 14, but we're also kind of talking about the overall trend in government, which is to divorce itself from the private economy. And we were talking about entities and companies and private sector industries that are now so dependent on government spend that they want to protect the government spend above all else, because that's how they built their business model. And you were just talking about some employment numbers and some things that you put in your latest newsletter, which came out at the end of June. And it's kind of shocking. So walk us through that real quick, Rob.
Right. So, we were talking about the divorcing of the public and private economy, and we're talking about how the public economy has really grown, even though the number of state workers by themselves might have shrunk some. If you look at total employment of everybody that's dependent on state spending, because a lot of this money is now effectively contracted out in some ways, that is much larger than most people are realizing. So let's I've got a staff member that is a genius at finding all these statistics who helped me put this together. But So take all of your government workers in the state, so federal, state, local. Okay. Now take all of your industries that are heavily dependent on government spending. So we suggested construction, healthcare, because remember, something along the lines of 80% of the healthcare in this state is paid for by government money at some level. And then utilities. So that would include the telecoms. And then, even the electric utilities, their day-to-day operations aren't necessarily funded by government, but a lot of their extra capital projects are, things like that. So take those three industries and add them into the government workers. That is 45% of our employment in this state is dependent on government funding in some way, shape, or form. That's a very scary number for us to be at. And I don't think it gets talked about nearly enough.
No, I would agree. I think that is, again, the oversized impact of the government spend in the economy. And it gets more and more every year. We've talked about that dependency economy where, on the one side, we've got, kind of the social safety net, of the welfare and Medicaid and Section 8 housing and SNAP benefits and everything else, how we've become more and more dependent on those things. I mean, 1/3 of Alaskans are on Medicaid. 1/3, 270,000 of the stuff. And then on the other side, you've got the companies, the construction companies, the telecoms, everything else who have become dependent on government contracts and the government largesse. So you've got welfare on both sides. And it's created this dependency state that we're in right now, where everything is dependent on the government. We saw this when Dunleavy tried to cut the budget, right? It was overall, it was an 8% cut. And you'd thought that he was killing puppies and stepping on butterflies in the streets, right? Because it was just, how could you do that? We'll follow. If we become so dependent on government spend to that extent, we've got a huge problem.
Right. And the problem that we have in this state is we've gotten to a point with so many of those industries and stuff dependent on all of that spending that what you or I or somebody of a more conservative mindset would consider fraud, waste, abuse, not the government's job, etc. Though to those folks on the other side of that equation, that they are viewing that same money as their paycheck. And so they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep it. And so we're saying, all right, those of us that are ideologically committed, we're going to fight hard to try to reduce that stuff. But in most states, most systems, we have an ally in that because we have folks that are also on our side because they're the ones paying the taxes that fund all of that. And between those of us that are ideologically committed and those of us that are voting our pocketbooks have a reason to try to keep the spending down because we know where that money comes from. Right now, the only folks that are fighting it are the ones that are ideologically committed. We don't have that section that it's coming out of their paycheck, unfortunately. So the ones that it is their paycheck are fighting very hard to keep the government spending or to increase it. And that's why we're seeing things like the defined benefit talks. And we're seeing complaints about, Dunleavy vetoing a couple of projects out of the STIP or Trump getting rid of some of the subsidies for the renewable energy and things like that, because people are looking at that and going, well, that's my paycheck. I'm going to fight against that because I want to make that money back. And, you and I, we're on the losing end of it. And to your point that you've made multiple times in the show the last couple of years, we're in the minority here. And, at least on the fiscally conservative side, we're in the minority in this state because we are ideologically committed and we don't have that natural ally of the ones that are financially committed because it's coming out of their paycheck.
That's a good point. And I hadn't considered it from that perspective, that if the people had things coming out of their paycheck, they would be more engaged, a la what's happening with the people who are engaged right now, because it is affecting their paycheck. That government spend going down directly affects them. And so they're fighting harder than we are because we don't feel it, because we don't see it come out of our paycheck.
And then going back to the point I made earlier is, what are the politicians doing as they're trying to increase the spend? Well, they're trying to do their level-headed best to hide the revenue source so that they don't have that pushback. whether that means the permanent fund, and that's why we're combining the accounts, or whether that means the internet tax bill, because that's more money that the state can get that, people don't see directly on a paycheck or on the receipt when they go to the grocery store, things like that. It's one more way for them to get money and keep the true cost of government hidden from the average voter.
I guess we're coming down to the end here. So kind of a final question. I would argue that taxes in this state are inevitable at this point, based on where we're at right now. That taxation in some form, whether it's property taxes, income tax, sales tax, is going to be inevitable to try and prop up state government. Yep. And we should be talking about it because it is inevitable. We should be talking about the best way. Am I wrong?
No, you're correct, because the rate that we're going, taxes are inevitable, but the structure is not. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves is not only, okay, what structure is going to be least disruptive to the economy? You should always be asking that question about a revenue scheme. But the other question is, are we going to formulate our taxes in such a way that they continue to keep the cost hidden so that we can continue to raise state spending? Or are we going to have taxes that take that true cost and make it visible to your average Alaskan so that we have an incentive to lower state spending?
And I think it's a valid point. And right now, as we talked about, I mean, we're already being taxed. It's the PFD, it's the PFD tax. Now, again, they're hiding the cost because you're never seeing the money. So it's not, and this goes back to, we should be receiving all the revenue from the oil directly and then having the state taxes. I mean, I've often in a thought experiment said, what if every Alaskan was issued all the royalty monies directly, and you'd all be doing a happy dance because everybody would be getting, $15,000, $20,000 per person. You'd be getting these big paychecks. And then the week after that, the state issued their tax bill and they found out that the tax bill was $18,000 or $19,000 of that $20,000. There would be a revolution in this state. But because we never see the money, we don't feel it. We just glide along fat, dumb, and happy.
And what we got to think about is, you've talked a lot about the fiscal plan working group framework that they came out with. That's effectively a smaller version of that. It's not, it doesn't go whole hog on it, but it's at least a smaller version of it. It's make sure the money gets out to people to start with, and then bring it back for government so that people see the true cost of what they're paying for, at least part of it. Not the whole thing, but at least part of it.
Right. Robb Myers has been our guest. We've been talking about SJR 14, the dangers of that, plus the fiscal state of the economy. It's a lot to unpack, and I hope that you folks are out there. Don't forget to pick up the podcast. You can share the podcast with folks wherever you find that. Robb Myers, thank you so much for coming on board.
Always good to talk to you, Michael.
All right, folks, we got more coming up tomorrow. Firearms Friday. Robin Sandoval from A Girl with a Gun is going to be joining us, and Willie Waffle. All right, final bite at the apple here, Rob. Anything we missed, anything we didn't catch? Here's your chance to sound off on it on the way.
Let me address Teresa real quick here. She's been making a few comments about the fishing industry. The fishing industry is really the only other industry in our state besides oil that meaningfully contributes to state government. You've got mining. Mining contributes a lot to local government, but not a whole lot to the state. The fishing industry is an interesting one. But again, just like the oil industry, the state could shut down the fishing industry tomorrow, and between the the permanent fund and that small broad-based tax, it wouldn't be necessary. The state could shut down all natural resource development, oil, fishing, timber, mining, the whole 9 yards, and the state could live on the permanent fund and that very small broad-based tax. And that's a scary place for us to be in. So I don't care what industry you're in the private economy, you should be very concerned about the push to use the permanent fund to fund state government, because it allows the government to ignore you, to view you as a cost, to view you as a competitor, not as a benefit, not as a partner.
Absolutely. Well, it's again, I wish this conversation was happening with more legislators, but unfortunately you have a whole slew of legislators in there who fully believe that as long as the public economy is protected, as long as the government spend is protected, we're doing okay.
Well, just remember two things about most legislators. Number one, most legislators don't currently have a job in the private economy. You got a few of us, but we're definitely not the majority. And number two, what are legislators going to be primarily concerned about? They're going to be primarily concerned about their next reelection campaign. And so we are tied to a 1-year budget cycle and a 2-year reelection cycle, or in case of senators and the governor, it's a 4-year cycle, but same problem. Even though I may not be up to run in a particular year, I'm still invested in the election cycle because I'm looking at who are going to be my colleagues the next year, things like that. So we are focused on the short term in that sense, that 1-year and 2-year cycle. And most Alaskans in the private economy, they're going to be focused on something a lot further out, 5, 10, 20, 30 years down the line.
Right.
And when you have that sort of a disconnect, you're always going to have bad effects.
All right, Rob, thank you so much for coming on board. As always, it's great to talk with you. Appreciate you being part of the show today.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. We'll catch you later.
All right, talk to you soon. Okay, folks, that does it for today. We are out of time. We will see you tomorrow for Firearms Friday. Be kind, love one another, live well. The Michael Duke Show.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.